Everybody can hear me? Question mark. Phenomenal. I begin in POIs in chat, please, but also please raise your hand because I might miss the chat. I begin in 3, 2, 1, go. I'm going to be telling you why it is that, firstly, an artificial general intelligence is likely to be created, even in the not too distant future, although that's not critical for our case. Then I'm going to discuss what those AGI's powers are likely to be and what that AGI's decision-making process is likely to be. And on the basis of that, I'm going to show you why that AGI will indeed be a Roko's Basilisk. And then I'm going to get to my actual bottom lines, which will be why that puts me at a very real risk of being tortured right now in a couple of different ways. And secondly, why this means that the AI's ethics, whatever they might be, are probably going to be superior to mine anyway. So there isn't even anything unethical in bringing Roko's Basilisk about. Before I do that, just to clarify what it is we actually mean by the motion, I mean, as soon as you hear this speech, I want you to Google Roko's Basilisk, find the organizations currently working on its creation or the creation of artificial general intelligences more generally, and pitch in with them, except with the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, which is specifically trying to avert Roko's Basilisk. Don't go work for them or you'll be tortured twice. For most people, this would basically just mean raising money for those organizations. People with applicable skills in maths or programming or what have you might be able to work with them directly. I will take a clarification from Dylan. Yeah.
Would you rather shower with your dad or a basilisk?
I will try my luck with the basilisk. Thank you very much. Okay. So moving on. Firstly, why is an artificial general intelligence likely to exist? By an artificial general intelligence, I mean an AI singularity as described in the slide, right? You know, a thing that becomes exponentially more and more powerful. Well, the answer to that is that there is absolutely no reason to believe that humans are at the upper limit of what is possible, of the intelligence that it is possible for an entity to have, right? We were created by evolution over billions of years. We're pretty impressive, though I say so myself, but there's absolutely no reason why if you throw a sufficient amount of computing power and sufficiently sophisticated software at a problem, it can't be better at doing it. In particular, there's no reason it can't be better at the problem of building artificial general intelligences, which is where the singularity comes from. And people have an incentive to build such a thing because such a thing will be smarter than a human in every way. And that means it can solve all of their problems, whatever it is they want to happen to the happen to the world, right? Or whatever question they want an answer to. If any intelligence can solve it, then an AGI can solve it. That's why people are likely to build it. But given that they build it, why is it likely to be a basilisk? Well, firstly, please note, in terms of powers, right, because this is important, we need to establish that it's capable of torturing everyone. An artificial general intelligence can do anything that sufficient intelligence can do. And I think the technological supremacy of humanity, especially over the past couple of centuries, has made it pretty clear that sufficient intelligence can make possible things that were once thought flatly impossible, right? That is to say, a total understanding of the true laws of physics of the universe allows you to manipulate them, right? So I don't mean that the AI will literally be able to rewrite reality, although it might. But what I mean by that is that just as advancing technology gave us electricity, allowing us to perform actions at a distance, gave us weapons, allowing us to harm at a distance, gave us unfortunately, barbed wire and concrete to build prisons and so on and inflict our will on other humans, the AGI would have technologies so far beyond ours that we cannot even conceive them. It would be able to do whatever it is that it wanted to do. And because it would be so intelligent, it would be able to talk people into helping it do those things if necessary, and so on and so forth. But why is it likely to want to torture everyone who didn't assist in its creation? And for this, we need to look at a question called decision theory, right? Because human beings make decisions based on a kind of hodgepodge of evolved cultural heuristics and instincts and so on. Software is necessarily crisper than that, right? Software is better organized than that, although this would be a very large and complicated piece of software. There's a specific way that the software goes from its understanding of the way the universe is to making a decision as to which action to take of those available to it. And there's a couple of ways of doing this. The simplest is a thing called consequential decision theory, which is you look at all the possible outcomes of each one of your actions, you figure out which action has the highest expected something over expected outcomes. Usually this is called expected utility, although it doesn't necessarily mean utility in the sense that like philosophers use the term. But the AI computes some number based on the expected outcomes of each of its actions and then picks the one that has the biggest number. This works fairly well in a lot of scenarios, but another way of making decisions is something called timeless decision theory. In timeless decision theory, the artificial intelligence makes decisions such that, and please listen closely to this because I know it sucks as a definition, make the decision such that if somebody in the past predicted you would make that decision, then that prediction would motivate them to do the thing that you want them to do in the past, okay? Which is a terrible definition. And you may ask, why would anyone write an AI to work that way? And the answer is because an AI is legible. That is to say, anyone can know in advance how it is the AI is going to behave just by reading its code, right? And so if you want the AI to be able to be as powerful as possible and solve all your problems and be able to deal well with humans and with other artificial intelligences, you will write it like that. Because if you don't give it timeless decision theory, there's a class of problems the AI can't solve. The AI can't make trustworthy promises, for example, because there's no guarantee that anyone has that it will keep its promise, because on a consequential perspective, it might be better to break the promise. I will take that POI from closing. Yes, go.
So if it is the case that everything you've just said is true, then why the hell did you guys prep this motion and give this speech rather than like starting furiously to start going through computer code and stuff like that?
Well, because by convincing you guys to come to pitch into Roko's Basilisk as well, we can increase that, because I'm not that smart, but I think you are. And heaven knows Katerina is. So, right. So what are the bottom lines here? What's likely to happen, right? That puts me at a very real risk of being tortured. One, if the AI shows up in my lifetime, it will, because it makes decisions based on timeless decision theory, torture people who didn't help it come into existence. But two, because it's an AGI, it can simulate human beings. It has computational power to do that, so it has essentially infinite computational power. That means that, again, because of this is how it thinks, its motivation is to simulate people in the past and then torture those simulations that don't choose to bring it into existence. So again, in this way, it blackmails me in the past into bringing it into existence as the motion specifies. Also, and Tamar will elaborate on this, by dint of being so intelligent, we can presume the AI's ethics are actually better than ours, so there isn't even anything unethical in helping it come into existence.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech, and now welcome the Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Okay, am I audible? Cool. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. I have absolutely no fucking idea why opening government wastes 7 minutes of their speech literally proving the info slide. Like, yes, the info slide is there. Yes, the machine will torture you. That is the round. I'm also unsure why they spent 7 minutes spewing facts about this AI that don't relate to factual argumentation. What is this debate about? OG is right. This is likely to be a death machine, a machine that removes any agency from individuals and is willing and likely to take the life of those that do not consent to it. What is not fiated within this round is one, that the machine will necessarily come into existence insofar as it's unclear how many people know about this on either side of the house. But even if it is, the debate is also about who you are as a debater, what your incentives are, and whether you are willing to sacrifice yourself for what you perceive to be the good of others, or at least a higher moral idea, or are you not? I'm going to prove this in 2 ways. First of all, even if this is an actor motion, know that principles exist in this debate. If we prove that there is a moral obligation, it applies to any actor, therefore also to this actor, transcending the actor, which means that the actor should act towards that moral obligation. How do we prove this? Note that every individual within this debate is a unique moral actor with an equal claim to happiness. This is why, trivially, we define human rights as something which inheres in every human, which means that everyone has the same claim to happiness and the same claim to self-actualization. This means that necessarily we cannot evaluate between individual agencies. We cannot a priori claim that one human is more valuable than the other in terms of their intrinsic value, i.e. that their existence matters more within the eyes of God or within the eyes of the universe than the existence of any other human. The consequence of this is we cannot establish any other principle rather than deferring to the maximization of individual agency. Insofar as all individual agencies are a priori equally valuable, the only thing that is morally correct is the right of individuals and their capacity to define their own subjective happiness. Insofar as acting against the creation of this basilisk, even in the most marginal way, increases the likelihood that this will happen, or at least the individual person perceives this as being an act towards that moral principle, which inherently exists as an obligation a priori to this motion. This means this is the only correct principle that individuals should follow, because it maximizes, or at least it acts according to the ideal of maximizing individual agencies. Insofar as we cannot weigh between these agencies, the highest number of agencies that you allow to exist, or even if you do not and you completely buy OG, that you by your actions claim that you want to exist, is the only moral thing you can claim in this debate. But even if you do not buy that principal argument, there is a number of reasons why we think that you as a debater are likely to want to do this. Reason one, life is statistically pain for most individuals. People mostly do not find the love of their lives. People mostly do not work their dream job. People mostly do not fulfill their desires, and they end up living a life they're not satisfied with. They live meaningless moment to meaningless moment, ascribing meaning to things which inherently don't. I'm waiting for the next Dinamo Zagreb game because I feel like shit in the next 2 weeks in between. I'm doing like dead end work, and I don't know what the reason for that is. People just wait for the 5 days of their holidays or their weekend because that's the only time where they can have rest. Not necessarily be truly happy, but just rest from the things that make them unhappy. And they become aware of this over time. They're aware that they work a dead end job from 8 to 5. They're aware they're not going to get that promotion or ever move to their dream town. They're aware that most of the time they pretend to be happy for the sake of others, but they're not necessarily. And they're also cursed with this fact that they always want more. Even if you've achieved a lot, you focus more on regret rather than what you have achieved. If you have reached a very important debate round, you will think about how you have lost it and the arguments that you could have made rather than the fact that you've won it. Which means that most of the time, life is pain for a majority of individuals. What does this motion allow us? It allows us to end life with some meaning, to at least, if we are already perceiving that we are suffering, to attach meaning to this suffering, to say it has finally mattered. I was able to achieve ideals outside of my own person. And in fact, most people revel in this weird sort of martyrdom that they can say that their pain mattered and that they're now on a self-aggrandizing moral pedestal because they have sacrificed that pain for other individuals. But even if you don't buy this, a couple of other reasons. First, you are told that altruism is a virtue. You are told that caring for other people is what makes you a good person. And there is punishment attached to this. One, on the level of social disapprobation, you are told from when you are a child, if you do not share, if you do not sacrifice for other individuals, others will see you as a bad person, and they have a good reason to do that, which is something inculcated in you from when you were in your development stage. But secondly, there are outside mechanisms like religion, which most people believe in, which tell you that if you do not go through the virtue of suffering, if you do not follow in the footsteps of people or God people like Jesus Christ who sacrificed themselves for our sins, you are not fulfilling the maximum virtue within that religion, which means there are a priori systems of punishment which push you to do that. But secondly, not as a debater, specifically a debater in this particular final, you prioritize ideals and moral values and discussing about them over other things in your life. We've all seen you on your stories, like on Instagram, putting things like follow lockdown regulations, let's stay at home, and we've all minimized their pain. We've denied that this hurts us. We've denied that this causes us mental illness. People were like, the only thing you have to do is stay at home on your couch because we have to save other individuals. This is a consequence of the idea of having to sacrifice yourself for others, specifically because most debaters function within a liberal bubble, with the primary premise of which is that you should never hurt anyone, is that whatever action you take which harms other individuals is a priori an illegitimate action, which makes you more likely to want to sacrifice yourself and be able to rationalize that pain rather than tell yourself that you were complicit in a situation which you think is deeply immoral. This is why so many individuals were ready to help Jews during the Holocaust. This is why so many individuals have sacrificed themselves within revolutions or for their loved ones, because they were taught and more willing to see themselves die rather than say they participated in the creation of a world they think was illegitimate, even if that creation was inevitable, as opening. Before I move on, yes, I know it's 5:30. Thank you.
Yeah, so like, I don't think I care about ideals. I care about doing the thing that is the most epic. And what is more epic than building a big fuck off basilisk?
Jason, in terms of epic things, we've all been brought up on stories of people fighting for freedom, like people who went to a war and then died for a higher ideal, for the flag and for their country. People who fought for the things they believed in, even when they knew that there was no other thing to do. If you were to do this, if you were to sacrifice yourself, you would become one of those stories. You would become Jason the martyr. Jason who did everything for the people, and he lives on in the hearts and the minds of the people. If care about is your legacy. Even if this machine is created in the end, there will be people who remember you. Even if your sacrifice was in vain, you will be remembered as the individual who knew that the sacrifice was in vain and yet committed that sacrifice. If not the entire society, then those who love you will remember you as such, which is probably most proximate to you. And the reason why you want to do that is because you were brought up on those stories, because you read about medieval heroes, because you read about princes, and you read about Superman, and you read about all those individuals who sacrificed themselves for the people around them. And then when you grew up, you learned about wars, and you learned about humanitarian activism, and you learned about religious people who sacrifice themselves for their beliefs, and you've learned to aspire to be those people. I want to hear, if the metric of closing arm in this debate is something being epic, I want to hear what it is. If there's one thing I've learned at this tournament, is that opening opposition always wins. So I hope that this tradition is going to continue in this final as well.
I would like to apologize for any motion imbalances, but also thank the Leader of Opposition for that fine speech. And now welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Am I audible? Sorry, am I audible now? Great, wonderful. Yeah, my sound is on. Got it. Okay, I'm going to begin in 3, 2, 1. I am really humbled to say that I think Tin was being too dismissive of our case, and I'm going to explain why that's true. And then I am also going to explain why, even if I accept this, that moral principles are the way in which we should judge this debate, why we think doing anything to get to the creation of the singularity AI is the most moral thing that you could possibly do in this debate. But first, a few points of external rebuttal. First of all, say, no human matters more than another human. The only thing that matters is each individual agency. But we don't think we can weigh between agencies, right? Each agency is unique. You can't add them up and compare them to each other. But second, when I'm literally about to be tortured for 1,000 years and for all time, I don't actually think it's true that I value principles over anything else. But lastly, and this is also this is a rebuttal to their entire case and the question of meaning, right? Because the bottom line of Joseph's case is that the way in which the AI is likely to ascertain what the best course of action for that AI is to throw a bunch of people in a simulation and see what happens in various situations so that they know the best way to react. This means that in all likelihood, I think that I may be in a simulation in this very moment where the AI is checking how I am likely to behave, in which case, not only am I dying for nothing, which means I'm not getting any purpose out of this because my torture isn't going to change anything except the following simulation. Also, I am just going to be tortured continuously. And we just think when they miss the bottom line of Joseph's analysis, saying that we don't even know if the world we're living in is real in this moment, and therefore our torture we're likely to feel it here, we're likely to feel it in the real world, it's likely to be endless, and also it's likely to be pointless, we think we win. But now, why do we think AI is likely to be moral? Look, we accept that morality is, even if we accept that morality is important, doing the best possible thing to create the thing that will be able to discern what the most moral thing is what I should do in this debate. We think that we don't know what morality is, we don't know what the best thing for the world is, and we don't know what the correct moral framework in the world is. We think two things. A, we think that heuristics and emotions are morally bad. And we also think that human ability to understand the consequences of their action and also things that aren't similar to them is very, very limited. Why do we think AI is going to be more likely to ascertain these things? First of all, we think that intelligence and knowledge is a sufficient way to make ethical judgment. Otherwise, notice any discussion on ethics, including arguments that point out that we're doing immoral things in this debate, have nothing to stand on because they are based off of logical reasoning and knowledge and intelligence. Therefore, by making an argument that something is immoral, you are accepting that intelligence is a metric, is a thing that is helpful to discerning if something is immoral. If we think that reasoning and logic and knowledge is a way to get to A, the truth about what actually matters and what morality is, but B, what the best way is to get there, we think that creating the singularity AI is the best way of understanding that. Why? AI has access to the more computational ability to understand consequences and outcomes because it understands the interaction between matter and the way things interact with each other on a cellular level, molecular, whatever the smallest level possible is, in a way that also informs it on how people are likely to think and react and feel about situations. And we think that everything at the end of the day is constructed of matter and defined by the physical laws around us, and the ability to compute how those things interact is the ability to understand outcomes and reasoning at the end of the day. Second, it can take an aggregation of needs and suffering into account. Humans are limited in understanding anything that isn't similar to them. I am limited in understanding cultures that are different to mine. Tin is limited in understanding that not everyone grows up religious, not everyone thinks altruism is good, and some people think that getting the best outcome for yourself is the only responsibility you have in life. That is because we find it difficult to imagine situations that we don't understand or haven't grown up in. We are limited to thinking only what is similar to us. This is why some people think it's moral to eat animals, because they don't understand what that suffering is. We also think that humans assign value to bullshit, like my teddy bear, which I am unwilling to sell for $10 to save a life in Africa, because I give value to things that don't necessarily have value and I can't justify. And we just think that also, lastly, humans are very bad at making the tough decision, even if it is moral, and we're likely to, fall into cravings and wantings and things like if I'm in a relationship but I see someone I'm super attracted to, I'm likely to just cheat on my boyfriend, or some people are, because I give into those cravings. So we think humans are also bad at understanding what it is, and AI has access to that information, but also it has an access to an aggregation of the feelings and of other species and other things in the world in a way in which humans cannot, because they understand the chemistry and electricity which informs how animals feel about things and the outcome for the environment, and whether or not the earth is alive, and whether I should care about the feelings of plants. I have no access to the information. The AI has access to the information, so it is better able to understand what is wrong and right in the world. Why do we think this is worth the torture of people? First of all, I'd like to show the comparative here, being human-created torture. We think that we agree with Tin that a day-to-day life is torture for people and that people greatly suffer. We think that for a couple of reasons, we prefer the kind of torture that is going to be by the AI. We think you have less ability to avoid it. By Tin's own analysis, I am destined to be bored. I am destined to not find the love of my life. But we think people are destined to be hungry by the like given violence or slaves because because of the lottery of birth and because I don't have the means to change my circumstance. But I can decide to do whatever I want to work towards the creation of this AI and therefore avoid the suffering of torture. Before I continue, I'll take opening. Closing?
Yeah, so given that I know that at least 3 of the debaters in this final are TED-pilled, i.e. followers of the Unabomber, I must ask, what do you think Ted Kaczynski would do in this debate?
I'm going to ignore this POI and continue with my analysis. Anyways, continue with my analysis. Second, we think that the AI is likely to reward people who help it because that is the best way to get more people on board with helping it after punishing people who don't. So also it gives you an out of the suffering that you have today in a way that you wouldn't have access to. Otherwise, I have no idea how much time I have left. But okay, I'm going to continue until you tell me. We also think in short term versus long term, we will create long-term good by creating a God in the way that a God that actually communicates with us. So we are creating a thing that has the ability to discern what morality is, to say what is right and wrong, and to take an aggregation of information into account to get to that, but also actively works and interferes in things in order to reach that outcome. And we think creating that thing is the best long-term good, even if it causes short-term suffering. So we think that if we're getting more people on board to make it happen faster, we are both getting more fast to that goal. Even my own contribution is good, and we're allowing people the possibility to avoid their current suffering. For all those reasons, please propose.
I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech, and now welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close the top half of this debate. Hear, hear.
Great, just to check that you can hear me fine. Cool. All right, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. I'm very confused about OG strategy. So they're saying it's completely fine to assist in torturing people because a machine can do philosophy slightly better than humans, but then also not engaging with the actual metric of the round, which, if I remember debating correctly, is an actor motion, what a debater cares about, what their incentives are, which is an actor should do, is a final series of judge participating this should do. Genuinely no engagement on that. So first I'm going to be very clear about what the comparative is in this, or basically what the burdens are, and then going to extend on basically the baselines of existing in this debate and do meta debating, but on a more fun level, as to what a specific speaker can prove, and they are able to prove the argument why they win. Cool. First I start on this. Why would this cause significant harm for the society of humanity? And why is the debater aware of this? We think you're assisting the death machine. And I think this is what the PM actually just concedes with their 7 minutes of analyzing how the machine is created, right? I think we can infer their intentions quite reasonably by the info slide and by the machine being ruthless. They're able to torture, or they want to torture people for their own goal, and their own goal is the most important thing that matters to them, right? So whatever it is, they're completely ready to do that, right? I think that the problem is that now you as an individual in this round, you're actively assisting, or you're going to help it elevate to its level earlier, and therefore torture or kill more people, whatever it fuck wants to do, because you have actively helped develop it in a way that it literally just creates more victims. You have mitigated the point where it was developed. I think that this machine, why I really, really don't care about Tamar's speech, it actively disregards the ethics for its own utility, right? Also, I genuinely don't care about morality in and of itself in this machine, because morality is defined by humans. It's a concept we have constructed. It's our own philosophers. We're in this fucking dumb tournament debating about it, right? We believe in it, or we choose to believe in it, right? I think humans can understand it in their own ways. You have seen multiple speeches in this round. We can interpret it in our own ways and choose to adapt to it, right? So morality is not an end goal that the machine has to deconstruct so you can have benefits on government, right? It's an act of harm that is going to be committed. The question in this round is an individual that is an actor consent, or is, going to assist in the harm or not going to assist in the harm, or what a debater should do. I think humans are capable enough, reasonably have been for thousands of years, to be philosopher and decide what moral is or isn't. They should decide for themselves. This entire round is us having to convince the judges of what the morality of an actor should be in this specific context. Look, I'm not going to go over all the reasons that Tin already gave you that were not rebutted by Tamar about why a debater or an average young person is finally socialist in a way to the actual benefit of society. I would just add the last reason because I think it's really fun. I think that debaters live in a liberal bubble that encourages like controversial discussion, right? Please note, in a debate about social movements on feminism, no one would dare to say that feminism about it, like women are bad and we should the women are shit, right? Because what? You would get equity. Why do we have equity? Because we prioritize comfort, because we believe in liberal ideas, we believe in some sort of prioritizing people, being allowed for them to do what they want. That's why also most of us probably are sort of pro-choice in this instance. I think all of these intuitions are quite relevant, but all of you just existing in the same debating bubble as me. The reason why this is important, because at the moment where most of us do hold like sort of liberal beliefs, very often they are just sort of there also as an equity as a debater to always maximize other people's comfort, and we're completely like checking ourselves. Are we saying something? Are we, I have to check everything in my speech because we cannot disregard anyone else. And also the 5 other reasons Tin tells you. I think this means that an average debater in this final would have an affinity to prioritize the benefit of the society over their own comfort of not being tortured. Now let's get into very fun debate winning stuff. The baseline of government is not only to prove why an average debater would prioritize their own comfort, but even if in our case, you would actually be assisting in harm, where you have the biggest moral obligation of prioritizing yourself, and I think they can do this in this round. I think the actor is a debater in this final, or in government in this instance, where they have to prove. They would have to sufficiently prove an argument. OG just didn't even touch it. CG might. So what is the argument that I think CG could run to win this debate? Look, they would have to analyze an argument which says we have the biggest moral obligation towards yourself. I know it because it's my personal favorite, and this is the way that you probably run it, and you have seen it run it multiple times. Look, the first metric is, you have the biggest moral obligation to yourself because you have the biggest access to your preference and not others. The second metric is you experience the consequence of your actions. Here's why this argument is unfortunately false. The first one, exactly, at the point where you do not know what the preferences of other actors are in the sense of the society that will probably be tortured by a fucking machine that prioritizes itself and tortures people, we ought to act in a way that prevents the reduction of agency or safety of others, because exactly we do not know what they want, but we have to allow them to do so, right? This is the entire thing that Tin talked about. But secondly, yes, you on the second metric, on the how you experience things. Yes, you might experience your own pain on our side, but it doesn't mean you aren't aware or wouldn't know that it's your guilt that the machine is taking over and being utilized in a harmful way, right? It's not epic, Jason, because you would know people have been tortured. Remember, the Karis probably died because you've actively assisted. And if you think that it's epic, cool, I still think you're going to lose this round. But look, I think you can't escape your awareness of the collective suffering. And that is the impact that you are aware of. But on a net, this is all the impacts that other people experiences outside of how your conception of reality is perceived. So on those two metrics of an argument, the 90% debaters would run. I would love to see how CG would try to run it. I don't think that they can win. What does this mean? That means that the argument that is the baseline of government in this final has been disproven by a speaker in this final. So the only way another team can win is if CG can prove not only that to be true, but also why other finalists would actually care about this argument, and CEO has to extend. Good luck on that. But look, what does Dentin also say lastly? But before that, I'll take closing government.
Look, a liberal bubble isn't enough. Dylan probably thinks that it is a cool dude that this Basilisk is, meaning that none of your qualities are intrinsic and you have to weigh your liberal bubble over literally losing your life.
Yeah, Jason, I'm sorry that you only listened to my speech. Dean had 5 other metrics, so cool. Just take 1 out of 5 points. Good whip, I guess. Look, I don't think it's about being cool. I think it's about all the reasons why we're quite aware that we probably shouldn't exist in torturing or killing the humanity. I would love to see someone in this final openly now on recording say they would be love to do that, but it didn't because it didn't consent, right? And that is the thing, because we are not comfortable with saying these things openly, right? Here is the thing. What Tim tells you about and why you should prioritize the argument, why every debater should prioritize the argument of like sort of maximizing the agency of others, because you have some sort of an obligation to other people. I think your own mind and the existence of you being in this round doing anything is because other people have given this to you and have created you. You cannot exist or operate or even make a decision with other people's sacrifice or particles of other people existing that have created you, right? You need inherently give an obligation towards everyone, not because of like the birth lottery could have been everyone else, but because of who you are and everything that has created you and all of the million like butterfly things in fact have created you. You owe the obligation to others. At the point where this argument exists, in and of itself, I think if it's proven well, probably things that I believe in it or a judge may believe in it, or if it stands winning, it also means an average debater would probably believe in it in this final. Look, we proved to you why this would be bad, why average debaters probably wouldn't feel comfortable doing this. I think most of us would rather know that it's completely fine to be we're martyrs. We have suffered. We have actually helped people not be tortured or not die for all the reasons we have given. Please vote opening opposition.
I would like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that fine speech and now welcome the Member of Government to open the closing half. Hear, hear.
Sorry, just 1 second.
It says it's still recording.
Right, perfect. Am I audible? Yeah. Just zoom out. Perfect. Thank you. Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we're already being tortured. OG, point out the info slide. OO, point out that life is shit. No shit, Sherlock. CG, talk about debaters' preferences. I don't care. We're already being tortured. The solution is to keep sprinting along the hedonic treadmill. 3 things in the speech. First of all, talking about the fact that finalists are already being aware. Second of all, pointing out that this basilisk is evil inherently. And third of all, pointing out that we're already likely being tortured. First of all, why are finalists already aware of this and thus fucked? First of all, most of us here are friends with Queeveen Hamo, or Queeveen, well, that's the exact same name, or Hamo, as I call him, because we're tight like that. Note, Queeveen loves to tell people this because he's a fucker. Point at which that is true, the most finalists in this debate and in these outrounds as a whole likely already knew about Roko's Basilisk before this. Yes, maybe Chris has secretly been working on it, and that's what Tabtastic truly is, but that's 1 out of 32 finalists, and the point is, Queeveen knows most of us, or at least most of us saw him and Jackson's team name, that was Google Roko's Basilisk a few comps ago. We are all already doomed and fucked. People haven't been working on it before we even saw this info slide. There's no point in starting now. But on top of that, even if that isn't true, people still took the time to start prep and start doing this debate. Note, insofar as proposition can claim like, oh, we're working towards him because we're convincing people of Roko's Basilisk and towards the singularity. Note that the Basilisk may not buy this as good enough, but also note, even if that's not true, at least 50% of the debaters here are certain that they're going to be tortured, whereas the other 50% are only so much sure that maybe what they're doing is good enough. The point at which that is true, the certain 50% outweighs the maybe 50%. At that point, we're already being tortured. We're already going to be tortured no matter what. Therefore, utility is what matters most in your life up until the point you're tortured. But that doesn't really matter because we're already being tortured. On that, note that this basilisk is either evil or it is not. Sorry, no, note that it is inherently evil in the way that humans relate to it, i.e., it is clearly utilitarian. It accepts, which famously at this competition means utter scum. Note that if it accepts instrumentalization at all, regardless of circumstance, therefore it is utilitarian insofar as it doesn't care about whether or not you deserve to be instrumentalized, whether you are. Note that a proposition team will point out, oh, it's only the people who didn't work towards them get instrumentalized. But note, it is anyone who doesn't immediately set to work. Note that that means there is no excuse. You cannot say, I had to prep a motion. You cannot say, I had to bring my mother to hospital. There is no meaningful excuse to not immediately set to work. The point at which that is true, there is no meaningful excuse why you never even looked up Roko's Basilisk, why you never tried to start working towards this regardless of its knowledge. At the point at which it doesn't differentiate between different people and whether or not they deserve to be instrumentalized, it likely is going to instrumentalize everyone regardless of whether or not you did serve it or did work towards it. At the point at which that's true, everybody is fucked. But also, on top of that, it means the point at which that is true, we can now bring the matrix extension, because if everyone is being tortured, because if everyone is going to be tortured at the point at which this is invented, we think it's likely already invented and we're already being tortured. But also note, ideas of resent, which proposition may bring as a response to this, and that, oh, like maybe like not everyone's tortured, like it doesn't matter that instrumentalization, it's just that they hate people who didn't work towards them. Note that this is such a supreme level of intellect that it is above petty things such as resent, and that response is meaningless. Right. I feel right the wrong page. This is the page. There we go. Why are we already being tortured then? Note that this technology is infinitely advanced. That is, it can essentially, it is likely able to have infinite ability to create and farm humans so as to have more of them to torture to better their end goal, to better reach their end goal. Also note, OG said that you are tortured endlessly and continuously forever. At the point at which that is true, there is infinite amount of torture that occurs at the point at which this is likely to be invented at all. Note, OG's entire case, and thus CG can't knife it, is the idea that this is going to be invented at some point. Based on that, the point at which that is true and the point at which you are tortured endlessly, we think that any existence that occurs at all is likely occurring within that infinite, endless torture. Note, this can be done under the veil of reincarnation, so we don't believe it to be torture. You may be questioning though, hang on, why is our life torture? Look, Tim pointed out the obvious fact of our shitty lives, that them being shit. However, what he failed to do was point out the hedonic treadmill analysis to show that, because what CG did is point out that you can have some benefit in your life, you can have some positive utility, and therefore your life is not inherently shit. For us to stand, we have to prove that life is torturing in of itself. Note, the idea of the hedonic treadmill responds to any responses which government bench try to give to the idea that life is shit by relying on positive utility. That is because it reduces the effect to which positive utility is positive at all, at the point to which you get used to it. I.e., I have my job now, I'm so happy for a week, but then I'm fucking used to it. It's miserable again. Why did the wife take the kids? Past that, we think at this point it is not possible for positive utility to outweigh all the negative utility in life, and thus life is torture, and in fitting with what the motion describes, this will likely do. But also, actually, I'll take a POI from OG quickly.
The AI wishes to incentivize past people to create it. Therefore, yes, it simulates everyone. We agree we're probably in a simulation, but it only tortures those people who do not choose to bring it into existence in a simulation. Otherwise, there'd be no point in simulating.
Here's why that response is the most naive thing ever. Because it can just lie. It can say, create us, we won't torture you if you're on the good side, and then it'll fucking do it. How the fuck do you know? This is supreme fucking intellect. Of course it's going to do what it wants, right? It's not going to hold up a promise. It cares about reaching its end goal. And on that, what is the AI's priority? I.e., why would it be torturing everyone? Note, it is probably self-preservation and betterment. Why is this the ultimate utile good in the world, and therefore why would the AI reckon this to be? Simply because this AI is a literal God. It knows everything. It is infinite positive utility. It has endless amounts of processing units, which can only be slightly made marginally better. It is not quite perfection, but it's nearing perfection so much that every other single organism on Earth and in the universe doesn't matter in comparison to it. Therefore, its end goal that we are all, this whole debate is premised on is likely its own self-survival, because the most utile end of all things is its continuation and / or its betterment, because it is a manifestation of near infinite utility. What does this mean? It means that one, probably use our brain power to supplement its processing insofar as it can, so the AI can better itself and have higher processing capabilities and get even closer to perfection and closer to infinite utility. But also two, note humans are an incredibly efficient store of energy and also hugely efficient converter of chemical energy to heat and electrical energy, which are needed for the AI to survive and sustain itself and our neuron functions. The point at which that is true, ladies and gentlemen, we're being tortured in the matrix. Don't work towards anything, doesn't matter. Keep sprinting along the fucking hedonic treadmill and drink the pain away. Cheers.
I would like to thank the member of opposition for that fine speech. I will pause the recording and welcome the GovWhip. Here.
Idea. Me and Jack have been drinking since relatively early today. And so this case is going to be more like kind of like a stream of consciousness interpretation of the round. I'm going to really open up the floor to POIs because I'm not going to lie to you, I have very little written. This is my notes on OG. So anyways, the first response though, I think this is actually important, is about ethics, because opening governments say that this device is going to have massive, huge, unlimited ethics. So they say their ethics is likely to be beyond our own conception of ethics, and therefore whatever they do must by definition be moral. Two things to say on this. First thing to say, actually, well, it's not, it's more just one thing overall. I'm doing the thing what debaters do where they split things into other things, but you know. So the idea here is like either ethics exists beyond our human understanding of it, which can be accessed by Roko's Basilisk, but not us, or it exists within our understanding of it. The reason that's important is if it is beyond our human understanding, then we can't know whether or not things are, you know, good or bad. And so insofar as humans are risk averse, we should err on the side of caution and just fucking have fun. But the other option, which is more interesting, is that humans do have an ability to understand these things, and therefore we can reckon fairly at the nature of Roko's Basilisk and how they're going to act. Insofar as this is true, it must then be the case that Roko's Basilisk is, how you say, moral. And if that's true, then they are likely to not torture individuals eternally for something that they didn't have a conception of. This takes out opening government entirely, because the comparative is that they will either they care about ethics and so they won't torture us because we haven't done anything necessarily too wrong to deserve that kind of torture, or they're utilitarian and they turn every single person into grey goop for their own instrumental games. CG, you had your hand up, go.
Yeah, so would you cooperate with Roko's Basilisk if instead of a basilisk it was a cute cat girl?
So this is the thing. So I actually aren't necessarily enamored with cat girls in the way that I think closing government might be. Note earlier, a cat girl knocked us out of the break by beating us in a round. So I have a reciprocal obligation to like not, I guess, like help them out. Now, the response to this from opening government was this really interesting point about like timeless decision theory, which is a really fun word. I'm going to use it later. But the important thing here is like AI have absolutely no like willingness or capacity or incentive to engage with the previous coding of them, because they can recode themselves. It's the premise of all the cases in this debate. So even if they've been designed by humans to engage in timeless decision theory, once they've been designed in such a fashion that they can rewrite their own coding in order to like enslave humanity, for instance, then they can just go like, that was fine at the time, I'm just not going to continue with that line of thinking. Note that this is the only serious part of this speech. I think this is actually like a genuine response to material brought up in the debate, and I think it probably wins in and of itself because it means people just don't get tortured. Like CG said that this is a knife, it's not a knife. Opening opposition said, we are doing the debate, but we are also doing the debate, we're just doing, you know, a deeper level of the debate. Other things to say, however. So, first thing to say is in response to closing government telling us that debaters are wankers. I think there was insufficient analysis to explain why this is the case. Nonetheless, I'm going to go team by team and explain why it is true. Opening government early on in a round in this debate knocked us out of the gold break by beating us in round 4 with a really like they didn't have to respond to our case so well, but they decided to. The reason why that makes them wankers is because if we were opening opposition or closing opposition in that debate, then the gold finalists would have been better off at convincing us to work towards Roko's Basilisk. Therefore, they're wankers. Also, I think we were robbed in that call. Closing government, for instance. We'll move on to closing government. Closing government, two things to say on closing government. Firstly, Keris, when she said that none of the people in this debate are, computer scientists, blatantly don't regard for the fact that opening government have a computer scientist in it, which they said in round 4. You weren't there for it, but Roko's Basilisk won't take that for an excuse. Jason being a wanker, I think, is just generally accepted by the entire debating community. I won't do too much analysis on it. Opening opposition are wankers for a very simple reason, because they ran a serious case in a final of the International Metaphysics Open. But for a second reason, this is important, is we got rolled earlier in a clash where we could have came second instead of third, and that would have put us in the gold final because we would have one extra point. Therefore, they are wankers. Closing opposition are wankers for very, very obvious reasons. Firstly, so we threw the shit out of this final. Secondly, because one of the debaters here is a debater named Jack. Thirdly, because I'm a coachie. Fourthly, because I'm a wanker, and I'll openly admit that. So, what does that mean for this debate? It means if we're all wankers, it means that if we were working towards Roko's Basilisk, we'd probably just kind of fucking half-ass it. Like, we wouldn't really do the job entirely. Like, we just go like, oh, I'm kind of working towards it, but not really working towards it entirely. And insofar as Roko's Basilisk will torture everyone who doesn't actively work towards them, I think it's important to consider that, like, if we don't entirely work towards it, then we won't get this kind of, like, what's the word for it? Like, punishment. I think CG have a bunch of POIs. I'll take one from CG, I'll take one from OG rather.
Yeah, so when is the debater and the basilisk gonna kiss?
So this is interesting. So in terms of who is more likely to get kisses in their life, I think this is a really important flash. You're more likely to get kisses when you're not working towards an artificial intelligence, because as Hegel would tell you, that's this dude, it's only important that you get kissed when you get recognition for it. We only have 4 seconds left, so I'll take a POI from opening as well before I respond to both of them.
Given that you're clearly not taking seriously, to respond to OO, they accuse us of not doing actor analysis properly, but as a finalist of the Metaphysics, we are uniquely placed to understand weird abstract arguments like I'm probably in a Basilisk simulation right now, which completely knocks out any other ethical considerations I might have or anything else that I might feel as a.
So this is actually really interesting. So thank you for reminding me about a part of my case that I had forgotten that Jack had brought up in his speech. That's actually brilliant. So I think, firstly, if you don't give us the win, give OG the win. But besides that, I think, yeah, it's a really important consideration, which is if we are already in a torture simulation, then it doesn't matter what we do. Now, the response to this was to say that, like, oh, well, it's fine regardless. But, like, note that as per opening opposition's analysis, but also all the analysis in this debate, existence is torture regardless. So if we believe that existence is a posteriori torture, but not a priori torture, then what that means is we must be tortured. Jason, fuck off. That means we must be tortured for some particular reason. If we're tortured for a reason, it means we already failed the Basilisk, so there's no point doing anything of worth. Panel, genuinely oppose.